it's almost gone up by five times when you look at how much, say, a 2 liter or a 1 liter, a jerry can or bottle of oil is retailing at compared to what we were spending less than 2 years ago. When you look at the cost of milk, I was so shocked the other day when I went to the shops and bought a packet of milk for 65 shillings, Bread as well, now retailing at 60 bob, almost doubled in the last 10 years. So there are many issues Kenyans are grappling with. So even those who could live, say, on 100, we have this common term, those who live on less than $1 a day. How much can $1 buy now in Kenya? A packet of milk and a loaf of bread? Certainly not. So there are those concerns. And of course, with that also high taxation. We saw the concerns last week, even with the availability of fuel. But even with those issues, we're still seeing continued wastage and stealing. It's not like the cases of corruption are going down. So you have to link those. Where we are, what role has corruption played in terms of where we are now as a country and looking at where we stand as an economy? There are concerns around the debt levels as well. I think currently standing at about 8 trillion more. And also concerns that by the time we are borrowing this money, is it already designed to be stolen? That by the time we are coming up with some of these projects and budgeting for them, what amount of corruption is actually budgeted and sanctioned and approved by Parliament in those budgets, such that then it becomes very difficult to track because it's actually approved and legitimized. We are normalizing corruption when you look at how it's happening now, So there are concerns around how much we are borrowing, what we're using that money for, because as much as we appreciate the many projects that have come, if you just come out on this road, given that it has even affected how we are coming into this building, you can see what's happening. Those are good projects, but at what cost for Kenyans? How long will we pay for these projects? And is all this money that is being spent on these projects being used rightfully? How much are we losing to corruption, And how does corruption, in terms of how debt, how loans are used, impact our cost of living and how we live, our standards of living as Kenyans? I think I just wanted to highlight one of the other cases that we've really grappled with in the last 2 years, because even when Kenya was at its knees, because we know we're one of the most affected countries in regard to COVID-19, the impact that COVID-19 has had on this country, looking at the number of infections, the number of people that we have lost to COVID-19, people are still stealing. It's what we'd call the most egregious form of corruption. That when we're in a crisis as a country, we're in an emergency, a humanitarian crisis, a socio-economic crisis, a health crisis, and people still ensure that that money is not all going to be used for what it is intended for, in terms of creating some form of relief for Kenyans. We saw what happened to some of the PPEs that had been bought. Some of them are actually still lying at the KEMSA stores, So we bought a lot of them. They have not even been used because they were bought at inflated costs, and our counties, which were supposed to buy from KEMSA, are not able to afford them. So that was a whole crisis as well. But even with all the concerns that were raised, I saw a lot of religious leaders also pronouncing themselves to concerns around this corruption during the COVID-19 relief and response efforts. We are yet to get anyone punished for it. No one has been charged in court. Of course, because no one has been charged in court, no one has been convicted. And so our concerns remained unanswered because no one has been held accountable for the theft of COVID-19 resources during a time when we as a country were literally on our knees. I wanted to also just talk about what our constitution and our laws say about leadership in this country. I think I've already talked slightly in regard to Chapter 6 of the Constitution and leadership and integrity, but we know that the Constitution provides for the national values and principles of governance in Article 10 of the Constitution. And for the first time, because it's something that we really worked hard for, we have the Constitution devoting an entire chapter on leadership and integrity. If you look at many constitutions around the world, that's not the case. But we actually have strong provisions on leadership and integrity articulated in our Constitution. for the first time, because this was a departure from the previous constitution, which did not even talk about corruption, we actually have something on leadership and integrity. And even if we had a lot of issues in terms of pushing for that particular provision, those who were involved in the constitutional review and development process will recall that when this chapter came before politicians, they were very reluctant. And that is why the laws that have come out of this chapter are very weak, adulterated. When the law of leadership and integrity came to be debated in Parliament in 2011, there was a lot of there was a lot of adulteration, because they were not willing to be held accountable. And that is why we have so many problems in regard to people who have been charged with corruption and they continue to hold office, because there's no clear mechanism for their removal from office. And that is one thing that the politicians ensured, that yes, you'll have your Chapter 6, yes, you'll have your law on leadership and integrity, but no, these politicians will not be easy to hedge out, even if they are accused and charged and convicted of corruption. Because right now we have people who have been convicted of corruption, but they're still in Parliament, isn't it? They're still in Parliament. They're the ones who, if someone is supposed to be answerable, if you go to the Public Accounts Committee, or if you go to other committees which are supposed to ensure oversight over the use of resources, you will go and defend your institution or position in front of those same people. So how do you continue to oversight on behalf of citizens, continue to legislate, continue to hold institutions accountable, and yet you yourself have been convicted of corruption? It is such an oxymoron, it's such a paradox. And the other thing I also remember, when we were pushing for that, the provisions on leadership and integrity, because it was a much larger chapter. It's actually one of the smallest chapters, if you have noticed, very small chapter. One could be one of the smallest in the Constitution. It's because the politicians deleted a lot of the sections. They said, you know what, these issues on corruption are not going to be with us for a long time. We just need a few provisions. In a few years, we'll clear this problem of corruption. So we don't need all these provisions, on corruption. Hii si kitu ambayo itatusumbua kwa wakati mrefu. We'll clear with it, and so we don't need so much don't need to legislate so much in terms of what needs to happen in terms of corruption, because it's only a temporary solution. That was more than 10 years ago when we were debating the Constitution. Look at where we are now. We are dealing with even bigger issues, because looking at the number of people in office who have been accused of corruption. I'm just, I think those were just some provisions on leadership integrity. I just shared some newspaper cuttings in terms of the, where we feel that some of our agencies that are responsible are speaking from both sides of the mouth. Because on one hand, they're saying this is impossible, we cannot stop politicians who have been accused of corruption. On the other hand, they're saying, okay, we will try and ensure that people, I think if you go to the next slide, people who have been accused of corruption, here you can see there was a story just a few weeks ago. There's a plan to lock out graft suspects from polls. There were concerns last week that there will be no charges against governors or MPs or politicians before the elections. So there are a lot of challenges, even institutionally, in terms of how our institutions that are supposed to help Kenyans out of this quagmire, what are they doing? Because we were in this same situation in 2017, and it looks like even in 2022, we are going to be in a similar situation with even more people who have been accused of corruption. So also just wanted to share as TI what we're doing in terms of the fight against corruption, and also probably try and start that conversation in terms of how do we work with the church to try and ensure that there's a sense of morals, and integrity in regard to the people who are given responsibility for leadership in this country. So one of the things we are doing, we are currently looking at various cases and reports of corruption, reports published by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission and other accountability agencies, and just see who have been listed for corruption and who have been taken to court, who are being investigated, and we're going to do another list to now advocate that these people should not be cleared, but also take this list very actively to Wananchi, that this person has a case before them, they're answering a case, and you should actually not elect them. Because ultimately, when all else fails, if our political parties, as you can see, are giving tickets to people who have been accused of corruption, our agencies have said there's really little that they can do. It's going to be a tall order to block these people from vying for office. If all all these institutions fail, then it's ultimately upon citizens, and that is where we feel that the church also comes in terms of how do we educate, empower citizens as well to make the right decisions and say no to people who have been accused of corruption. Part of that work is research and analysis, because we have our work has to be grounded on facts. We don't want to accuse anyone wrongly, so that is why we are really looking at the court cases, which we have been tracking for years, and also the reports. What are they saying, who has been accused or charged and convicted, and so on. We are also involved in public interest litigation. Actually, this morning we are just going to be filing a case to try and see how we can compel the relevant institutions to ensure that these people are not cleared, but also ensure that have also the court pronounce itself on what happens to people who have already been legally removed from office through various processes, like impeachment. There are people who have been impeached, by the Senate, but they're still giving intention that they want to vie for office. There are people who have been asked by the court, directed by the High Court, to stay away from office until their cases are cleared, but they still want to vie. So what is the point of all this legal process if they're going to be cleared? So we want the court also to pronounce itself. Then what if we can't clear all these others who are still, under investigation, or people who have just been freshly charged? What about those people that the court has already pronounced they should stay away from office? What about those people who have been removed from processes like impeachment? Do we still clear them, or should they just be declared that they are disqualified from office until, they're proven, for those ones whose cases are still pending, until they're proven innocent? So public interest litigation has been quite important for us. The other aspect, and this is where we also see the church coming in strongly, is public vetting, and I've already intimated on that we are going to prepare these lists, give Kenyans that information in terms of Chapter 6, who has been caught in breach of Chapter 6, but also work actively with community groups. We are trying to work with churches as well to bring citizens together to hold vetting sessions. Call these candidates, people who have been clear, who are vying for office, call them and have dialogues with them, not just about, of course, interrogate whether they fit into that description of leadership and integrity as prescribed by the Constitution, but also interrogate what is the agenda, whether it's at the ward level or the constituency or the county level and so on. So we are actively holding and working with community groups and churches to have these social vetting sessions so that there's that engagement at the lower level and citizens are really empowered to know, because really these people are our servants. We pay them. It's not the other way around, but I think in Kenya it's an inverted situation where they are the big guys, we do what they want to do, but yet we are the ones who pay them. So why do we elect them and let them go scot-free without calling them back, holding them accountable, analyzing and assessing their performance? So we want to put in place a system where even after the elections, before the elections, let Kenyans interview these individuals and interview them against various criteria, including leadership and integrity and their ability to deliver. But then even after the elections, let Kenyans continue to have platforms whereby they can continue to hold them to account. You promised to do ABCD. We've heard that in Nairobi, ulipatikana you were caught in a fight, or you have been accused of theft, you have been accused of misappropriating or embezzling CDF funds. Give us the answers, let Kenyans demand answers directly from them. So those platforms for continued engagement between leaders and citizens is also very critical, because for us to be able to ensure that we achieve socioeconomic development, we must ensure that that dialogue between citizens and leaders is there, beyond the election. So that is what we're trying to put in place, and we see the church also playing a very significant role here, because you are the one, the church has, links and direct engagement with citizens. I think if it's one thing that Kenyans listen to, and when we've done our opinion polls, time in, time out, we have found when we ask, which institutions do you trust? You find that the church is held in high esteem by Kenyans, and we believe that if we're going to push these issues around integrity, I think we have our champions right here, in terms of church leaders who can then be able to appeal to the hearts and souls of citizens that the right thing must be done, and this is what we need to do to ensure that we hold our leadership accountable. Of course, On all this, we have to ensure that we are communicating very publicly and ensuring that there's visibility for the campaign. And so these are some of the things that we'll be doing. I just wanted also to share that last year we got, not last year, but in the last election, we got very special opportunity to work very closely with the church. So I was just sharing some of those pictures. And yeah, I've got some publications as well in the church magazines and some of the church media as well. So we really hope that's a kind of partnership that we can continue to have. This was just a commercial break. Yeah, just looking at where Chapter 6 stands and our institutions, you know, yeah, and where we are right now in terms of people being cleared to vie for office. Yeah. Yeah. So the EACC is standing there tall, trying to scare away the corrupt, but there's another institution saying, it's okay, you know, don't worry, you'll be cleared, because that's really it's almost a situation right now. But we're also trying to appeal to our institutions to speak from one voice, be on the same page, and I think it's also something that the church can assist us, appealing to these institutions that they must do the bold thing. They must do the right thing for Kenyans. You know, because as we speak now, whenever we talk about it, we are told, oh, this is impossible. You know, the law says this. We can't move because of the law. But this is a situation now because we are not willing to take that bold, you know, action. We are not acting with conviction, you know. That is how we end up very, very easily, you know, going to serve these hyenas. As you can see, many of them have been accused of graft, hate speech, tribal, I mean, the issues around, related to hate speech is the tribalism and as well. So that is a key concern. We can move to the next slide. I think the other concern we have as well in regard to elections and corruption is the issue of campaign financing. Where is this money that is being used in the campaigns? Where is it coming from? We have seen obscene amounts of money being poured on the ground. Simona, yeah, these people come over the weekend, yeah. The next thing you hear that people outside, just next to your churches, are fighting, communities are fighting for money that has apparently been left for communities for empowerment. They now call it empowerment. It's not called handouts anymore. Inaitwa empowerment, ya mama mboga, ya boda boda. Yeah, a lot of those fights are because of money. And even when you ask, how much money is it? Ya kuuza nafsi yako. It's not much money, it's just 50 bob. We are there having citizens fighting for 50 shillings a piece. 50 bob. The other day I went to my home in Western Kenya and found there was a shortage of 50 bob. 50 bob ziko hapi, wanasiasa wako nazo. Utapata wakati watakuja ground, pengine ngojea Sunday, ndio utapata 50 bob circulating. But for now, during the week, there's no 50 bob because it's been held by politicians. Wanangojea kwenda ground on Sunday, that's what they are issuing. 50, but what can 50 bob buy? We've just realized, hata paketi ya maziwa haiwezi nunua. Maziwa is 65 or 60 bob if you're lucky. Can't even buy a packet of milk or even salt. At least previously it could buy salt. What can it buy? So our Kenyans are selling their souls for nothing. And we're not asking where this money is coming from. And we always tell them that this money, that 50 bob, it looks so small. And you can't even do anything with it. But the impact of it is that when this person gets elected, all those 50 bobs they have been giving in the ward or in the constituency, they will want it back. And that is why we never see development. Because your pesa CDF, your pesa Ward Development Fund, all that money, they will find a way to recover the money. Because if you ask yourself, how much are these politicians paid? Yeah? If it's an MP, is it about 500, 600,000? So if someone is going to spend 50 million in the campaign, is it money that they're going to recover in 5 years during their tenure in office? So how will they recover their money? Because this money has to be recovered. So we're trying to appeal to citizens. Question the use of big money in the campaigns. All these choppers flying above and causing so much noise in the environment. Wanapata pesa wapi ya kulipia hizi choppers, you know? So we are trying to sensitize Kenyans because right now we have a problem where Parliament for many years refused to pass regulations to enact what we have as the election campaign financing law. It was enacted in 2013. But in 2013, of course, that was after the elections. It was said that it will be operationalized in 2017 when regulations can be considered. Come 2017, the operationalization of that law was deferred to 2022. And come 2022, they said they gave technical grounds as a reason why they didn't pass regulations for the campaign financing and also some limits. IBC had attempted to put some limits in terms of how much can be raised and how much can be spent by politicians, on what items, how much can you spend on media, how much can you spend on transport based on your locality. But all that was rejected by Parliament. In fact, it's almost immoral because it's actually more than 13, how many years now? It's 12 years since we have promulgated the Constitution. When you look at Article 88, it clearly requires that campaign funding must be regulated. So you then ask yourself, are we then holding our elections within the ethical and constitutional framework that our Constitution desired if we can't regulate campaign funding? And every time these regulations come up for discussions, wanasiasa wanasema ya kwamba tuhairishe. Let it be considered in the next election. In which election will it then finally be considered? Because now maybe we are looking at 2027. 2027, I can tell you, it will be another bunch of monkeys there. They will say, 2032. So when will we ever implement campaign funding, regulate campaign funding? Last week, there was some amendments that were passed in Parliament on campaign funding, which actually remove the requirement for MPs not just MPs, sorry, but politicians, candidates, to publicly disclose how much they're raising for the campaigns and how much they're spending. And without that public disclosure, that's the whole essence of regulating campaign funding. You want to ensure that politicians are accountable for how much they're raising for the campaigns and what are they spending this money on, Because without this disclosure, then there's no regulation. So what has been passed by Parliament as amendments to the campaign funding law is that we remove the disclosure, public disclosure, so we don't have to disclose how much is being raised and how much is being spent and what is actually being spent on. But we know that's where the concerns really lie. I asked, where is this money coming from? A lot of this money, as I said, it's either coming from proceeds of corruption and crime, money laundering, acts of terrorism, and other kinds of crime. That is a reality. The other source is public resources, and there's been a key concern that for the first time we have an unprecedented situation in this country where we have two leading coalitions with access to power and resources. We have seen public spaces, residences, residences which are funded by taxpayers being used for the campaigns and political engagements, We have we've seen government vehicles being used in the campaigns. Government officers, instead of providing services, they're not in the offices, kuhakikisha kwamba huduma kwa wananchi inatolewa, they're on the field. So what happens to citizens? Are they getting services at this point? We've seen police having to be deployed on the ground because of the early campaigns. It's not even official campaign season yet, campaign period. And because of that, because now they have to deploy extra security, because again, you've seen, people are fighting because of those little monies, and there are all these vurugu on the ground. Police have to be alert, and we are having more police having to be deployed in political activities. What does that mean for Kenyans in terms of security? So we have to question, what does the use of public resources in the campaigns mean in terms of access to services? And especially at this time, when Kenyans are struggling with the high cost of living, and not able to get sufficient resources when you look at health, water, education, and so on. But it is these same officers who are being deployed in the campaign. And as I said, it's a concern because previously, most of the time, we've only had to deal and call out one side, stop using public resources. Now it is two sides, We have the incumbent deputy president. He has a claim to incumbency because he has still access to those resources. You have the president who's supporting the opposition leader. That is still access to power and resources. Then you also have people at the county level, sitting governors who are looking at another term in office, and also governors who are leaving office but still have their candidates. Nowadays everyone has their candidate, and you'll do everything to ensure that your candidate gets that position. So lots of people with access to public resources, and that is one of the reasons why what we have done is we have come up with a portal, where we're encouraging citizens to give us evidence, information, pictures, where they have seen resources being used, because previously we have complained about this issue, but our respective agencies have said that without evidence they can't move forward. So now we're trying to give evidence so that this this issue around use of public resources is actually dealt with very decisively this time round. So we then see us using we actually see no use of resources, public resources in the campaigns. Because we need those resources. We've just detailed how we're struggling with debt, high cost of living. I mean, we really need that money elsewhere and not out in the campaigns, promoting one particular agenda. And I think the other aspect around lack of regulation in the use of campaign money is also the unequal playing field that it creates, particularly for young people and women. I think it's exciting now to see the number of women and young people that have come out through some of these nomination processes. But I think there could have even been more people, more young people, more women, more deserving Kenyans. Let me call them clean Kenyans. The thing is, clean Kenyans don't have a clear pathway to office. It's very difficult for them. And if you listen to the stories of these young people who have made it through the nomination process, it has been a very rough ride. It hasn't been easy, because they don't have those resources to be able to campaign, and compete with others who are more wealthier and who have access to proceeds of crime, proceeds of corruption, and are deploying it in the campaign. And it's one of the things that we're also trying to educate citizens on. Someone who is going to represent you well doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's very wealthy. Let us listen equally also to people, young people, women, young men, people with persons with disability as well. These are the people who hurt the most when we don't regulate campaign funding because they don't have access to this kind of resources. So it's important that we give this message out to Kenyans. One of the other things we're also asking Kenyans is, as you vet, because we are doing the vetting on integrity and also their capacity to be able to deliver as leaders, but also asking questions of, can you also disclose to us, where are you getting, what is the source of your campaign funding? We're asking them, ask them these questions. We're encouraging aspirants to also share information publicly, even if we don't have the regulations in place, but can they do it out of their own self-initiative? Just publish that information. Because for us, if you're going to be guarding resources, you're going to be oversighting public resources, that accountability has to start now by you being able to tell us what are the sources of your campaign funding. So we're also asking citizens, ask them those questions when they come to you to campaign. Hiyo pesa ya chopa umetoa wapi? Hii 50 bob unaturushia umetoa wapi? So that there's some that level of accountability. But I just wanted, and I think I've already reiterated and across the presentation on what we think the church can do is, of course, one, condemn corruption and the corrupt. We've seen this happening already, but we want it to be the clarion call. You have, as I said, access to majority of Kenyans. Almost every Kenyan, has an association with a church, a mosque, or a religious entity. And we believe that here religious leaders can help a lot in terms of push the button, rather, in regard to fighting corruption. So condemning corruption and the corrupt, because currently what we see, and if you listened to the arguments by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution last week when they said that they can't prosecute politicians during this time, because they said that prosecution gives them undue visibility or undue advantage. And I asked myself, wow, where are we as Kenyans that if someone has been accused of stealing, tunaambiwa kwamba huyu mtu ameiba pesa, and then all of a sudden that person is not someone that you're stigmatizing. It's someone you're holding in very high esteem. Because that's what they're saying, that Kenyans, Kenyans hold these people in very high esteem. They call them, these are our thieves. Hata kama wameiba, huyu ni mwizi wetu. That is a problem. It's a big problem we have in this country, and we have to change that narrative and that image. A thief is a thief. Whether he has stolen big money or small money or a chicken or 5 billion shillings, it is a thief, and we must condemn those acts of corruption, and we must stigmatize those people so that Kenyans can now actually say, let us now just by our own will reject the corrupt. I think also that the church, as I said, creates a grand platform for continuous civic education. We have had a problem with civic education. I know maybe yesterday you may have spoken to IEBC as well. I don't know that they also relate some of the challenges, particularly in terms of resources, and some of these resources are supposed to go to civic, voter education. And we hold that voter education should be continuous. It should be part of civic education. It's not something, should not be an event that we only get into in an election year. It is something that should be continuous, throughout those 5 years of an electoral cycle. So we are asking the church to provide that platform for continuous civic education. And we've seen that happening already, but we wanted to just ensure that it is continuous, it doesn't stop. Yeah, because there's still a lot of people, especially young people who are voting for the first time, who still need that education. I've talked about our efforts towards bringing leaders and citizens together to conduct vetting, and we are asking that the church assists us in that, in terms of, even just giving us, could be simply as simple as giving us venues, promoting these vetting opportunities in terms of announcing them in your churches when they are within the locality. And beyond vetting, of course, is the performance monitoring. What happens when these people are elected? We need to have continuous platforms where these leaders are held to account and also held to, continue to demonstrate what they're doing in regard to their manifestos and promises that they have given to Kenyans, or how they're meeting the needs of Kenyans who have elected them. So we need that support from the church to provide, to help us provide those platforms. And then I've told you about the challenge we have, thank you. The challenge we are having in terms of campaign financing, and what we're doing currently also is we have deployed election monitors and working with partners as well to help us monitor these, give us these reports of public resources that have been used, and so on, so that we can be able to report this to institutions so that decisive action is taken. And we also believe that the church can help us as well in terms of that education. If the individuals also within the church who can also help us, who are based at the community level, help us with that monitoring, I think that will also be a way in which the church can help. But I would also be interested to hear also from you where you think the church, practical ways that the church and leaders can be able to support the fight against corruption overall, but particularly as we move towards this election, to ensure that this time we have a different crop of leaders, people who actually meet the constitutional requirements on leadership and integrity, and people who are moral as required by our Lord. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Sheila, for that presentation. I think we need to give her a better clap, please. I know the discussion must be eliciting some reactions from you, so we will allow probably the first three to share their thoughts, questions, interactions, or comments. Three who have something to say. 1, 2, 3. Okay, just come.
Thank you, Madam Sheila, for this elaborate presentation. Sometimes when we listen discussion about corruption, some of us feel like crying. Listening yesterday from the presentation from the government officials who are here, and listening from you, because yesterday there was a cry about corruption. And now I'm wondering if the government, which in our view has all the machinery to stop corruption, is crying about corruption. So who else will stop corruption in Kenya? We know that corruption is bleeding this country to death. Unfortunately, somehow getting its root even in our sacred spaces. I am wondering, who will stop this corruption in this country. Of course, we also know that it begins at family level. By the little things we do with our children, sometimes we send our children to do something for us and we tell them, enda nitakupatia. And so it gets into their mind, and that's how deep it is. I agree with you. As a church, we have a challenge. But again, listening to the government crying about corruption, I'm wondering who else will help this country to get out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sheila. I have two concerns. One, you have given us a very good presentation, but all along I've been wondering, is your department or the organization that you stand for, is it a toothless dog? Can't it do better than that? And if it can't, for one or another reason, what would you expect the church to do to strengthen your Transparency International? Because giving information and awareness is not good enough. Secondly, you talked of 4 items which the church can do. Among the 4 items, enlightening, educating, giving civic education, I was still wondering, why haven't you added the 5th, that the church can organize street demonstrations to demand act on these issues for the government to be able to legislate on the rules which would make those corrupt people be prosecuted and prosecuted immediately. Because we are saying some cases have taken 12 years, some legislative have taken 12 years, 5 years, 10, and every time they get postponed. Why can the church go to the street, demand from the government that they legislate these rules immediately and quickly? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. My worry, when we have elections or that period of election, these things come up of corruption and corruption. When shall we stop talking and act? Because that's the only thing we can do. We can talk and talk and talk. When shall we stop talking and act? Either as a church or as individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sheila, for your in-depth presentation on corruption. I have a few concerns. You did elaborate well that, of course, the issues of low inflation and, of course, the economy contribute. Now, my concern is, one, corruption thrives more because of the state of poverty that we are having in our society. You have equally concurred that previously there used to be an argument that people live in less than $1 a day. Today, even $1 is not able to do anything. Now, what can you people do? Or what can we do to address this issue in terms of the ever-escalating inflation vis-a-vis the low salaries? Because right now, when you talk about corruption because of elections, those politicians are coming with those huge monies, and they thrive because the minority down there need that money. And it's not a surprise that a politician will call people, and people stand there for a few minutes, and they say, now give us this listening allowance. We now need the listening allowance. And Mwananchi is demanding for it. The reason is because they have empty pockets. These people run around, these women and young men, they are running around these politicians because down there they don't have sugar.
Maliza.
Yes. And so how can you address that? Two, I'm concerned that this issue comes very strongly during this time, but again, we don't hear much of talking about this corruption in between the elections. Some time ago, there used to be very concerted efforts where Wananchi were being propped in, so people to start talking about corruption and even vetting. Citizens would like to do this. Where are the funds for those vetting? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the questions. I'm told I only have 5 minutes, so I'll try to answer them together. A number are related. One, on the issue around who else will stop corruption in this country? I know the answer is right here. We are all in this room. But one of the things we have also looked at is if we are to change and stop corruption, there has to be a total behavior change process in this country. Not just at individual level, but starting at individual level. And I think when you asked me who will stop corruption, you also talked about what is the role of the family. Of course, it starts from there. What is the upbringing of our children? Are we bringing them up in an environment of ethical values, morality? You know, we also have to check it at that level. You know, what are we exposing our young children from an early age? We're also where we are because of what we do in our own personal spaces and how the role modeling. I think our society also lacks strong role models. Look at the role models we have. They are the politicians, and already we have seen how they have conducted themselves publicly. If those are the role models, what do we expect from our children? We have seen our children now becoming also obsessed with all these fancy big cars, choppers landing, you know. Those are the role models we're exposing them to. And many of them now don't even say that they don't care how they get those things, that wealth, or those shiny possessions like cars and so on, and big houses. Look at the role that social media is playing currently, you know, where you feel compelled that you have to post yourself posing near a nice car or a nice house, yeah, because we have the wrong role models. I think we have to promote the right role models for our young people. Yeah, and that is why I have asked that we as a religious community need to step up because the role models are here. What can we do to ensure that these are the role models that our children are looking at too? But other than that entirely, we really must create a behavior change model in this country. We have very strong values that have been prescribed, not just in the Constitution, but also our religious values. What happened to those values, you know? But we need to craft that behavior change model and start changing the mindset of individuals. And then this will then go to institutional level and societal level so that we can see more efforts towards fighting corruption. But it has to happen in that we have to look at the issue around our values. I always say that this is something we don't look at. I think we have focused a lot on the enforcement aspect of corruption. We focus a lot on, you know, what happens after money has already been stolen. So we're focusing more on investigations, prosecution, you know, the adjudication process, recovery of money. So we are basically reacting. We are chasing after lost, stolen resources. But what can we do before that as prevention efforts? And that is why I feel that the church plays a great level, a great role in terms of preventing corruption. So it starts with that aspect around value, education and learning, and it's something that we must pay attention to. The other thing, I think someone asked, are we a toothless dog? First of all, we are a non-governmental organization. We are not enshrined in law. We are not EACC. We are not a constitutional body. We are just a non-governmental organization, and I think I've detailed what we have been able to do, even in our limitations, because we're also relying a lot on well-wishers to give us resources to be able to conduct our work. But other than education, because we've long realized that it's not just about educating. In fact, many people now know corruption. We were at a time where Kenyans would say we don't know what corruption is, you know. But now many Kenyans know corruption. Many people will talk about corruption day to day. Even the president is talking about corruption. So it's not about knowledge. It's more or less about practice, and that is what I will link it to the aspect around. We need to see behavior change. We need to see now practice. From information, because Kenyans are now well informed, we need to go into practice. And I think one of the other people who asked questions said, we can't just keep talking. We now must act. And for me, acting is now about changing attitudes. That is the space where we should be at, changing attitudes and changing changing actions. And for us, that's why it's not just about education, but also empowerment. And some of the things that I've asked for, we have recommended, like the vetting platforms, platforms where Kenyans can continue to engage with their citizens in regard to performance monitoring, even after they're elected, is part of that action. You know, so that we're not just talking, but actually giving citizens tools by which they can fight corruption. One of the things we are doing on the ground is also social audits, and I think this is where even the church can assist. You know, we're trying to work with already organized, structured groups in terms of how can we ensure that if there's that road that has been brought from Nairobi, mesema ya kwamba tutajenga barabara, how much money has been brought for that road? Is that, when you look at that road, does it look worth the money that was said to have been disbursed from Treasury to the local level? So we're trying to empower people, give them the social audit tools, so they're also doing and assessing, you know, public expenditure tracking as well. So we need to ensure that we're giving Kenyans the tools to be able to check corruption and prevent corruption at the lower level, rather than wait for us now to start chasing the cases, chasing people who have already stolen. We also, as I mentioned, one of the strategies is also public interest litigation. We have gone to court on a lot of matters, even this issue on campaign financing. We have gone to court. We're waiting for a ruling next week. On the issue of Chapter 6, we have also gone to court. There are many issues that we have taken to court where we've gotten stuck because parliamentarians, particularly because of vested and self-aggrandizement, have been unable to push for certain accountability provisions. I think in that way I've also answered that question on when shall we stop talking, and I've given practical tools that we are using and which we are going to want to engage with the church to continue to promote them at the community level. In regard to the issues around, you know, what can we do? There's this question around, yes, Kenyans are now asking for listening allowance. We need to have concerted efforts to ensure that civic education is continuous, and that is why I actually said that this is where the church comes in, because as I said, for us, we are limited in terms of resources, and that's why we want partnership with the church, because we believe this is a platform for continuous engagement, empowerment on these issues around corruption, so that we're not just talking about corruption once in 5 years, but it's an ongoing engagement. I don't want to call it a discussion because we said we don't want to talk about it, but engagement, you know, giving people tools, changing values, and relearning and learning new ways in which we need to act and do things so that we ensure that we are acting in a way that is more accountable and transparent. On the issue of listening allowance, for us, our only prayer is if we regulate campaign financing, then we'll be sure then politicians will have to tell us what they're spending their money on, you know. And if then we are able to regulate and we have more transparency and accountability in terms of how money is being used, we'll see less of these incidents in terms of handouts being given, because someone has to really account for what they have used their money for. We'll see less cases of violence, because a lot of this money that has been illicitly acquired is what is being used to fund violence among different groups supporting different people in the campaigns. We will see less instances of voter intimidation. We'll see less instances of voter buying, but we must first ensure that we regulate campaign financing. That would be my response in terms of how do we move forward from that particular situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bishop Julius and Emmanuel had something very pressing, but I want to give one of you 1 minute to consolidate it. So maybe, Julius, you can just say it as we wind up. Yes.
So I take 30 seconds and he takes 30 seconds. The first one question, agenda setting theory in the media provides an opportunity in which newspapers do write what perhaps they may be paid or perhaps they have information for. How can you ensure that the kind of articles you have presented are not just skewed in one area of agenda setting as far as corruption is concerned? The second one is, how can the Freedom of Information Act provide a way in which Transparency International partners with the church in terms of fighting against corruption? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I want to thank Sheila for the great presentation, very informative, informing us of the status of the corruption. But I believe that the ball needs to be turned on our side. As he was presenting, and from presentations yesterday, I felt like the Lord was directing it to us. The government has done its part with the legislative process, but there is no will to implement it. When it comes to issues of morals and virtues, it is not about the state. We as a church is the social institution entrusted with the building and forming character and virtues. Where did the virtues of simplicity go? I think the issue is not so much about legislation. As long as we are going to focus on that, matters of corruption are matters of the heart. For me, this is very personal, and I think Sheila kind of alluded to that. As an institution called the church that is entrusted with the responsibility of building values, where are we? Why are we 80% Christian and 90% corrupt? Why is CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, in our country, which is 80% Christian, the lowest? And I believe, it's only that it was not given to us, the Muslim countries are doing much better in instilling values than us. For me, it amounts to us standing to ourselves, do the soul searching, and tell ourselves, why are we not going deeper to influence our Christians from childhood through the youth to value the idea of loving God and not loving money or greed? I believe it is greed that is driving us, not anything else. The richer are still corrupt, actually more corrupt than the poor. So I don't agree with the idea that it is because of poverty. The richest are the ones stealing more money than the poor. So it is the matters of the soul. May God help us through this presentation to do soul searching and tell ourselves, why are we only 1 inch deep and thousands of miles apart? It is time for us to ask ourselves, can we go deep and change the values of our people so that the 80% Christians can be seen in the way in which they are influencing policies and also implementing matters of integrity and matters of value. So it is time for us to search ourselves and do the work. Thank you for allowing more than 30 seconds. Thank you. I think that's a very good comment from Bishop Emmanuel. They have taken really 30 seconds, and I will ask Sheila to respond to the first one, because that one was a compliment.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Bishop Emmanuel. Yes, that was a very strong comment, and I will not want to even adulterate it further. You've said it. On the question around what can we do to work with the church in regard to freedom of information, and that is when I talk about social audits, public expenditure tracking, and those efforts, it's actually based on our right to information as enshrined in Article 35 of the Constitution. And I believe, as I said, we want to work with the church to get these structured groups, the youth groups, the women groups, you know, the men groups as well in church. How can we work with them to activate them within the community, to ask for this information from the county government, from the national government, particularly starting with projects that are being implemented in the community. And we can use that right to access information. It is one of the key sunshine laws in this country. It has been not been used as much, but I believe, yes, that is a challenge we can take. We need to actively work more with the church, and that is why I gave that proposal. Let us see how we can do social audits and public expenditure tracking and other social accountability initiatives, but this is all based on the right to access information. On the question around agenda setting, yes, I believe that, and it's actually something as civil society we always talk about. What do we need to do to set the agenda rather than react? Because when you react, something has already happened. Money has already been stolen. Yeah, pesa imeshaibo, imeshaenda. So what can we do to instead set the agenda on issues around good governance? And I know that is an area we have sometimes struggled with, because sometimes there's so many things happening, but also because of our access to media. It may look easy from where we sit, but it's not. Because again, these media have their owners. In terms of if you want to set agenda, where do you start talking about issues? Many times it's in those media spaces. And that's why we're saying, let us look for alternative spaces. For us, that's why we're saying, let us look at another alternative space is the church. Because, as I said, every Kenyan, most Kenyans have a relationship with a religious entity, whether it's a church or a mosque or a temple or so on. But so how do we activate these spaces and try to set the agenda there? Because the truth is, media is owned by certain people in this country. The same people that we are talking about. The same people that we have talked about, if you look at the ownership. So many times it's very hard to push certain agendas, you know, because there'll always be gatekeepers who are preventing certain information from getting to the public, or there's very limited space to be able to educate Kenyans. So that's why I'm saying we must actively look for spaces where we can set the agenda, educate Kenyans, provide alternative narratives in regard to corruption and good governance. But thank you very much for that thought-provoking question. Thanks.
Let us give a clap. On behalf of everybody, we want to thank you so much, Madam Sheila, for that nice presentation. Before we welcome the next speaker, we need to stretch a bit, isn't it? So I'll ask John Mark to enable us sing a few stanzas of a song as we stretch.
So last that we stand. I know stretching while singing can be a challenge to some people, so stretch first so that you can. Now I'm sure some of you are Sunday school teachers, but I may not take you through a Sunday school song. Yes, the song we want to sing is Standing on the Promises, because today we are talking about real issues. But we want to find out, like Bishop Emmanuel has asked, where is the matters of the heart? So we want to stand on those promises, so we'll sing stanza 1, 4, and 5 as we prepare for the next session. Standing on the promises of Christ my King. It is in our program as well. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages let his praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing, standing on the promises of Christ my Savior. Standing, standing, I'm standing on the promises of God. Stanza 4. Standing on the promises of Christ the Lord, bound to him eternally by love's strong cord, overcoming daily with the Spirit's sword, standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing, standing, I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot fall, listening every moment to the Spirit's call, resting on my Savior as my all in all, standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing, standing, I'm standing on the promises of God.
Thank you so much. Let us be seated. Our next topic is going to be on civic education and Election Monitoring. And this is going to be presented to us by Mr. Mulle Musau. Mr. Musau is a leading domestic election observation expert in the country and region with more than 15 years experience in this field. He was part of the 6-member core expert team recruited to inaugurate the ELOG, that is Election Observation Platform, in 2010. He has consulted widely with organizations such as NDI, the Carter Center, EU, EOM, EISA, international IDEA and continental observation networks such as WION and SADC. He has also participated in the leadership of Global Network of Domestic Election Monitors as chair of its Transparency Committee, that is 2016 to 2017. He is currently the regional coordinator of East and Horn of Africa Election Observation Network and national coordinator of Election Observation Group. You can see he comes to us with a background of a very rich experience. So we welcome Mr. Musau to give us his presentation. Let us welcome him with a hearty clap.
To the leadership of the Anglican Church of Kenya, the bishops and senior clergy present in this particular conference, all protocols observed, good morning. I was telling my colleague Sheila that I think I came with the right outfit, since the picture which was there, I also had the same top that I was wearing now. Yeah, so it is my pleasure to really be here and to have a chat with senior clergy, with the bishops, the leaders of this country, the leaders of the conscience of the nation, actually you can be able to call it that, who represent us in every aspect in our lives, in the different corners of this particular republic. And when I was called, when I was asked to come and give a presentation on how we can be able to work together in terms of improving our electoral processes, I felt very honored because I know you're the people who work with the people. Wanasiasa wanaweza zungumza zao yao yote, but the people who really deal with the people are the people seated in this room, and the leaders, the faith leaders in this country from all denominations, because they are dealing with the matters of Kenyans each and every day. My brief was to speak to you about the election process. As you've heard, my background is in elections. Within the next very few months, now nearly less than 100 days, we are looking at the 13th general election in the country since independence. It is an election which comes at a time that we have seen contestations in these elections. The last 3 elections from 2007, 2013, 2017 have been hotly disputed and contested. It comes at a time where the country, every time there comes an election, it becomes a major economic problem to the country. It becomes a major social problem. We lose lives. Tensions are created across the country. Yesterday, I think you were honored to have the CS for internal security assuring the country that they will be safe, because every time we come to an election, among the questions we want to ask ourselves is how safe we are going to be when the elections come. So it's not even so much of which leaders come in. that nearly becomes secondary to the lives of Kenyans. So in essence, we start the conversation about elections speaking about our security and about our safety. And that is not what should be. Elections, by their definition, and the conception of election, is that elections are supposed to be a peaceful process of transitions when it comes to leadership. We could have fought for that leadership. People could have decided to do a wrestling match to know who is going to be the next president of the country, or who is going to be the next member of our county assembly. But from a democratic dispensation point of view, we adopted as a peaceful way, a peaceful process in which we can be able to elect the person who would want to become, or who aspires to become our leader. And therefore, even within the greater framework of the peace studies in the world, elections is among them, because it's a way of settling political disputes and contests in an amicable way. And you can therefore see, even before I start speaking about the role of the bishops and the senior clergy, exactly where your role even comes in, and how you squarely position yourself into the framework of running elections or the conduct of elections in our country. So I'll make a presentation and then the role and the clergy. I was involved with the ADS of the SEK in developing materials that will be given to you after the conference or during the conference. I think you already have them. That will assist you in functioning or in terms of working within the election framework so that you can be able to better interrogate the processes that we're going to be having between now and August, and not just between now and August, but to make you have a firmer understanding of how the electoral processes in the country run and how you can be able to participate in the same effectively. I begin by my presentation by quoting one of your own. You know this man more than I do, but he's a man who is known in this country for all the great work that he did. And he gave this quote, which I decided to just pick out because it actually explains squarely the role of the bishops and the church. And he says, "Do not stay at home, but go and see for yourself how this exercise will be carried out." He was talking about voter education, voter registration process in his time, but he was saying, go out. You need to go out and find out what is going on. The people of the country are engaged in a national process that the church must appreciate and the church must participate in. And because you're the leaders of the church, therefore, you need to be part of the process. That was Gitari. I decided to also put this picture in my opening remarks of the presentation, again to remind you of one of your own, Bishop Alexander Muge, Kipsang Muge, who also a great champion in terms of matters of governance in the country. This is a cover of, for many of you will know the Weekly Review, which was one of the main magazines of that time, that carried political information. And this particular one was speaking about Muge was the main story around this country because of some of the hard-hitting positions that he was taking. And therefore, it had a very serious headline talking about the bishop under siege. But basically, it was under siege because of his pronouncements, because of his engagement in terms of some of the things that he was speaking against. So, in my view, when bishops and the senior clergy speak, the nation pays attention. Everybody is paying attention. So they all want to speak about Muge. Muge is in the newspapers, Muge is everywhere, as all of you can be if you start interrogating some of the most interesting issues or topical issues that we have in the country. Now, in terms of the role of the church and the leadership of the church in our elections, there are a number of things that I wanted to point out and just explain. First, our expectation is that, and let me say this first before I even go to this, that you know, in the axis of power, or in the way power is arranged, the power arrangements in the country, we have the state, and the state has the monopoly of power. But there are checks to this power. And within democracy, we do ensure that there are checks and balances that ensure that between one state organ and state arm, then another one checks it. But outside of it, the only other real power that can actually be able to check the state is the religious order. Because it is the only other very organized set of an institution that can be able to check, because all over. As I said when I was beginning, the Muslims and the Christians, and I think one of the bishops was speaking about it when I came in, about the fact that there is a power that the churches have, even over corruption, and they can be able to make decisions about it. So it needs, therefore, to come out and condemn, therefore, all forms of governance, poor governance, especially when you're talking about elections, the conduct of elections. We've seen the effects of bad elections in this country. In 2007, we killed each other. We also displaced populations. Hundreds of thousands of people were left homeless as a result of those elections. So when elections are not conducted in the right way, they displace the same congregations that you're meeting on churches every day. It pits brother against brother and sister against sister. So where the conduct of this is being done in a negative way, the church needs to stand up and be able to speak against it and condemn it. Secondly, the church, through its leadership, needs to encourage Christians of good standing to offer themselves for political seats. A month ago, I was called to speak to a conference like this, but for the accountants of Kenya. And they were all speaking and asking, can we also be able to run? And I was telling them, but you're the accountants. You are good in balancing books. You're the people who are trying to look for integrity in terms of money. So why would you not think that you should be among the people who should be fit to run office for these political positions? It's the same thing with the church. If you have Christians of good standing, people who we think we can be able to believe in, we need to encourage them and support them to participate in the process as candidates for those political seats. Yesterday I was doing my rounds with the political party primaries, and one of the leaders I met of one of the parties was telling me about the way they have been having a problem trying to sort out the good leaders and the bad leaders, so that they seem to say, and I even heard it was something which was repeated by Jeremiah Kioni yesterday on Citizen TV, if you watched the interview that he had, that the elections have not been sieving out bad leaders. So they believe that by having consensus or by sitting in a boardroom, they're able to say, but wewe tunajua ulikuwa mwizi wewe simama kando. Ama wewe ulikuwa na kesi kotini. But they believe that the electorate cannot be able to do that. So they think this is a better system, what they are doing. Of course, personally, as somebody who supports universal suffrage, I would not go for the idea of boardroom decisions, but they are arguing that it has become very difficult for us to be able to stop bad leaders from coming through the process of elections. One way in which you can be able to do this is to have Christians themselves of good standing stand for these positions, so they can be able to contest these seats, and then you can have good leaders. Speaking truth to power where there are issues of national concern. Bishop Mulle did that, Archbishop Gitari did that, Bishop Ireri has done that from your leadership. Bishop Jeff Tagadhaka has done that. We have Bishop Timothy Njoya, who has also been on the forefront. The church, basically, has been on the forefront speaking truth to power. And therefore, that must continue. The voice of the church cannot disappear when there are issues of national concern. And we think that even within the spaces that you have, in the villages, in the corners of all the corners of this country, at the national level, that the voice of the church must be heard. and it must be very clear when it is speaking to those issues that are affecting the nation. The church and the leadership also needs to participate in various political activities, okay, such as civic education. Actually, the church is the biggest dispenser of civic education in the country. And it has been like that for a very long time. In the 2017, in the run-up to the 2017 election, our surveyors, the Elections Observation Group, proved that the coverage of civic education in the country was at 60%. So 40% of the country did not get any information or robust information on the civic education, which should have been the one which guided them in terms of how they were going to participate in the elections. Sasa kama hawa Kenya hawakuhamasishwa na hawakuelezwa on how the process goes, then there's 40% of people who are very ignorant who went to make decisions on the ballot, and chances are they made the wrong decisions, or they did not follow the due process. So the church, because again the church is everywhere. SEK is covering all parts of this country. The Catholic Church is covering all parts of this country. All the other churches and faiths, including the Muslims, are covering all parts of the country. These are the best people to be able to influence changes and even share information in the country. The church also needs to appreciate the leaders. You were with one of the leaders yesterday, the CS. There are other leaders. There is the president. We have the opposition leaders. We need to work with them because they are part of your congregation. They are not the leaders of the church. They are politicians, but they are your part of your congregations. So you need to appreciate the leaders and help provide solutions. So not just speaking against them or speaking to them, but also working with them to ensure that we get solutions to issues that Kenyans are facing on a daily basis. I've talked about, sorry, if you go to the next, I thought you had not moved, sorry. I was using my slide and I realized I was in the wrong one. So you also need to point out the wrongs being committed and encourage others to obey the law. In this country, one of the biggest problems that we are having is impunity. People do not respect the law. Leaders do not respect the law. And wananchi also, to some extent, do also not respect the law. So again, part of the calling of the church when it comes to election issues is to ensure that we can be able to point out the wrongs which are being committed and also call out those who are also doing those things and ensure, or at least plead with them to be able to follow the law, where we have the law. Without law, there is only chaos. And in a chaotic environment, we cannot be able to have peace. And we cannot be able to conduct our affairs with any decency. That is done. You also have a role to prophetically point out the wrongs being committed and encourage, sorry, that is nearly the same. I think there's something which was repeated there. But you also have a prophetic duty to be able to lead this country and show the country the direction that it ought to go. Where we are having problems with how we are settling our have laws. You don't do an election outside the framework of laws. So if we were starting on a clean slate, if the country was starting off today, or we started working, the country got its independence today, one of the first things before we conduct any elections is to have a legal framework. How are we going to conduct these things? And what are these issues? So that's where usually it begins. That's where it begins. So the question of setting up laws, and I'll speak a little bit about why even that affects us even today. So the set of the legal framework, we move to planning then for an implementation where the commission and other actors are also planning in terms of what is going to happen. Now that we have the laws, now that we are clear this is plan, how do the political parties start planning? How does the electoral political parties start planning? How does the IEC and all the other actors start acting? Then training and education. We have laws, we have planned. Can we talk to the people? Can we tell the people what this is all about? Can we also train ourselves to know? So even the church, and through such kind of conferences, is able also to be able to be trained, to get education, to get information on the electoral processes, so that every actor in the country can be able to effectively participate in the entire process. If there is no information, then there is nothing that is going on. Very many people will remain ignorant and they will not be able to effectively participate in the process. And then there is voter registration. So in our country's laws, and in the guide, in this guide, we have indicated all the laws which are relevant to elections in the country. We have the aspect of voter registration and voter education is a continuous process. So when we say that the church, therefore, needs to conduct civic education, voter education, it is throughout the entire cycle. And our Kenyan cycle is 5 years. So this is all happening within the 5 years. Throughout the registration is going on, throughout training and education is going on. I don't know how many of you know that even as the status of the voter registration process at the moment. Are we registering? Are we not registering? Can you be able to walk to an IBC office and register today or not? The law says that the voter register is closed 60 days to the election. We are not yet 60 days to the election. But the law also says that if IBC was to suspend the voter registration for one reason or the other, there must be a notice in the Gazette that says that. And it tells us also the reason why they are suspending. The one reason that the IBC can suspend voter registration at the moment would be if they start conducting the voter audit. And I'll come to that issue at some point. But they have to explain to us. And it is your duty to find out that status, because every day I'm having people who are calling me, very senior people, who are calling me and asking me, can I register today? I'm not IBC. But we know that IBC should, the voter register should be open as we speak, unless there is a reason, and that reason is explained to us as Kenyans. So voter registration goes on throughout. The electoral campaign is where we are headed right now. So in the electoral campaign, first, we also have the party nominations, because once the party nominations happen, then the next thing that these parties are going to do, because candidates have been declared, you have gotten the names of who is going to participate. The presidential candidates next month are going to submit their papers. Then they can now start the official campaign. You need to know, however, that we've actually been having campaigns, but these campaigns have been illegal campaigns. The official date for campaigns in this country is the 29th of May, all the way 60 days, all the way to 48 hours before the elections. All these things which have been happening, we should have been calling them out. We should have been telling them, what are you doing? Why are you having rallies? Not only did we have rallies and campaigns unofficially, but we even allow these politicians to conduct these things during the COVID times. They not only did something illegal, they even endangered our own lives. We allowed them. We need to know these processes because they must be called out. And all Kenyans must speak and say, we are not stupid when we say this is the election campaign period. It is part of a legal framework. We have set it up, we have accepted it, we have endorsed it, we promulgated it. Our laws are saying 1, 2, 3. We cannot therefore allow politicians to be able to get away with doing things which are illegal and yet expect that the results of that illegal activity is really going to benefit us. They are defying our decisions. I hope I'm not very hard-hitting. I think I was warned that I'm speaking not to a civil society organization, but to the church. But I'm just saying it as it is because the law is very clear on election campaign. That's one of the phases of the election. Then the most important one, which everybody thinks about and what everybody plans for, is on voting operations and the election day. That is what is in everybody's mind. Most of these other processes are not part of this. So August 9th is the mouth. Hata ukiuliza ule kijana wa class 2, muulize elections ya Kenya itakuwa tarehe ngapi, anajua. That election date is very important. It's a red letter day. Everybody knows about it. However, there are very many things which lead up to it and even after it that we must be very conscious about. The verification of results, you know, this has been a trouble area. Transmission of results, acceptance of results, confirmation of those results has always been a major problem. So there's an entire period where we are doing that, just after the elections are over. And then in the post-election period, we look back. What happened about that election? What were the issues? What issues did we pick up? We have been using the 6 ballot boxes. Kwa debe tunatumukiza ballot 6. Is that the way to go? Do you want to continue doing this thing? There is a way that you've been fighting about our presidential election. Do you want to continue having the same way or going about the same way? So we ask ourselves questions about that election. Once we have ideas about what we can be able to do, we move back to the legal framework because we're going to say, what are the reforms we want in our elections? That's how it becomes a cycle. So whatever you get from the proceeds you get from that post-election assessments, evaluations, the petition process is over, then now you can be able to say, how do we start planning for the next election by having reforms, and what reforms, what did we learn? And let me say this as I finish the issue of the election cycle. Elections are very contextual. Our elections, our Kenyan elections are ours. And we cannot be told by the US or the Russians or Ukraine or Uganda what to do. We can choose how we want to run our elections. If, for instance, the parties, political parties and their membership agreed that we'll never have party primaries but we'll be having consensus building, and Kenyans are okay with that process, that's how we do it. And I'll give you an example. In Gambia, which is part of Africa, on the western coast, they use marbles. I don't know how many people have been able to observe the Gambian elections or followed up. They use marbles. Unajua zile tunatumiaga za kucheza, those marbles. That's what the ballot is in Gambia. And they've been doing it for a very long time. Mpaka the people ukiwaambia letee ballot paper, akwambia hakuna kitu kama hiyo. Mimi nipatie kama nataka ODM na ODM ni orange, nipatie marble ya orange. Ule wa blue nipe ya blue. Na utumbukize pale kwa sanduku. Sanduku yao inakuwa ni drum. Ile drum ya zamani tulikuwa tunatumia maji ile ya chuma. That's what they have. Na iko na kashimo kadogo pale juu kanatosha tu hiyo bano. Tulikuwa tunataka bano. Kanatosha hiyo bano. Na akiekelea hivi kuna mahali kipita inapiga kakengele, mtu anajua ni bano moja tu imewekwa. Those old wazers, the young people, the professors, they always say, every time they have a debate, do we introduce ballot? Wasema hapana, this thing is working for us. Atuoni wizi, tuko sure ile iliingia pale ni moja, zikiekelewa hapa tunaona kala hii na kala hii na kala hii, na tunajua huyu ndiye ameshinda. They are okay with that system, isn't it? So I'm trying to appeal to the church that even if you want to come up with your own practical ways of how we can conduct our elections so that we do not have the kind of problems that we keep having, you have the power to do that. And therefore you can change even the systems that we are having. And that is part of understanding this entire process so that you get to know what works for you and what does not work for you. Otherwise, saa zingine utapata zile shida mingi tunapataka za uchaguzi ni kwa sababu kuna vitu tunafanya ambazo hata sisi wenyewe hatuzielewi. And as a result, we get ourselves into conflicts. Let's move on to some of the key processes. Now, this is basically, I wanted to give highlights. Of course, you'll have all the details inside this, so I've just been given a few minutes to be able to take you through what you would call some of the main highlights, things you need to look out for in terms of the electoral processes. So in terms of the key processes in the election process, I've decided to choose the things which are in the remaining part of the process, so that tuangazie sasa hii August, na tusiangalie huko mbele ya August, tuangalie kwanza August, what needs to be done. The first thing is that political party nominations, the dispute resolution, and the presentation of party list is happening now. So political parties zimezunguka nchi mzima, mingi, apart from UDA, I can report this because I have my observers out there, mingi nimeona watu zitumie njia ya consensus. And there are very many reasons for that. Some of them are telling you, well, you don't have the money. Because if IBC is asking for 40 billion to conduct an election countrywide, are you asking UDA, Jubilee, Wiper, sisi kwa sisi, na wale wengine watafute 40 billion? So that's the first problem they're having is money. The second problem they're having is that they don't have the personnel that can be able to conduct elections. Kumbuka, hizi chama zinachaguaga wanajuana. Nataka Bishop nani akuwe ndio mkubwa wangu wa National Election Board. Huyo bishop kikaa na yeye chini anakuambia mimi sijui, wananiambiaga what to do. Yesterday I was actually with the chair of one of the parties, CCU, and the National Election Board chair. Akaniambia mimi nakwambia mimi nakujaga hapa na naambiagwa. Na nikaenda kwa zile zingine zote, they are all facing the same challenges. So unapata hata wanafanya surveys, watu wengine wanafanya surveys, wanasema tunafanya survey tuone nani atakuwa kiongozi ambaye anajulikana, ule anaweza pata kura mingi. Unaenda kwa ground, wanatuma watu kwa ground, ukirudi kwa ofisi wanasema tumeona Sheila ndiye atakuwa kiongozi. Raila anamwambia hapana, mimi sitaki Sheila. Ametoka kwa ground, ameenda kufanya survey. Sasa ameambiwa hapana, nataka Bishop. Sasa zikienda hivyo, unaanza kupata what elections are you doing really? So they are facing a lot of challenges. There are internal problems, there's resource problems, there's personnel problems, and they cannot be able to really do it. And that's part of the reasons why tumesema pale kwa role of a church, you also need to appreciate the leaders who are there, but also work with them to find solutions. Because the people are not happy. Now, I've told you the part of the parties. Sasa they're part of the people, and the members of those parties, they are extremely angry. And you've seen them in TVs. Watu wanasema ametumia pesa yake. Let me use an example which is already there anyway, ya Nairobi. Tuko na Bwana Ngatia ambaye ameweka posters all over. Alafu jana unaambiwa tumeenda kwa Polycarp Gathe. Sasa tutafanya nini na huyu jamaa ambaye ameweka posters kila mahali? Watu wana maishu, watu wana machungu. By the way, next Sunday, the coming Sunday, you need to do a lot of soul soothing to some of your members, because they are coming na machungu, wanasikia wamenyang'anywa positions zao, wale walikuwa wanawania mahali fulani ikapatiwa mtu mwingine. Sunday will be coming to you. You need to guide them. You need to give them spiritual guidance, because those are the issues which we are facing in our country. So the political party nominations is an entire activity which is going on. We need to be watching what is going on in this party. We need to pay special attention to the dispute resolution, because hapo ndio watu wanasema wacha tuende mimi nasikia nimenyang'anywa kura zangu naenda kujitetea. We need to find out, are these guys doing the right thing? Ama ni watu wengine next Sunday pia watakuja. Unajua sasa ni hii group ya kwanza ni ya kunyang'anya, group ya pili ni wale wataenda kwa wasuluhisho mambo yao, waone haikufanyika vizuri, na watakuja ile Sunday nyingine watakuwa wamekuja kwenyu. And then kutakuwa ile party presentation of lists. Zikienda IBC kuna watu watajipata hawako. Hao mtakutana nao kanisa ile nyingine. The next one. You need to know, you'll be meeting these are your people. I'm positioning you in terms of your responsibilities. The other big issue which is going on and which is going to be happening very soon, if it has not started, is the audit and the audit of the voter register. ELOG, we did an audit for the last voters register of 2017. And we did that audit after the elections, not before the elections. KPMG ilikuwa imefanya audit before the elections. When the elections were over, we went over the register again. The errors that KPMG walipata before the elections were the errors we found after the elections. That tells you that nothing much was changed in that register. So we went to the 2017 elections, and nikitu nimeambia ABC, when we have gotten an opportunity to talk to them, nimeambia, you guys never cleaned that register. A register is one of the most strategic materials in that election. If you have 1 million dead voters, then there are dead people who come in to make your decisions. If you have errors in terms of computer errors, even in terms of your names, then utaenda kwa kituo na utapanga line ambao umekaa pale for about 1 hour na ukifika pale unaambiwa jina yako haiko. These are important issues. So the inspection, especially where the public will start inspecting, and this is coming in June, the inspection of the voter register is an area that you want to pay key attention and tell your members to go and find out whether their names are in the register, because they will be very disappointed after that, on that 9th, and as I was saying before, your Sunday next, mutakutana na hao pia kwa kanisa. Our voters ambao wamejipata hawako kwa elections, na pia watakuwa na malilio yao. We have a political party campaigns which I said are officially starting on the 29th of May. You know our campaigns. You have seen even the current campaigns, even however illegal they are, a lot of violence. A lot of violence, a lot of activities. The code of conduct is not being followed. Use of money in the campaigns. We have refused to put laws governing money in elections. Money, and I think Sheila was here to talk about that. We have refused to put money, a framework for money. As a result, hatujui pesa zinatoka kwa Saddam Hussein, hatujui pesa zinatoka kwa huyu jamaa Putin wa Russia, hatujui pesa zinatoka wapi zile tunaona kwa, and some of this will hurt our country in the long run. Violence, intimidation, incitement, hate speech zinaongezeka. Our reports are showing that every day people are, in fact, hate speech ni kama imepungua kidogo, but hizi mambo ya fake news, incitement, mambo ya misinformation is growing. So look out for those things in the party primaries. On voter education, the content is key. What information is being captured? The coverage, like I said, last time, 60% of the country. What happens to the 40%? So wherever you are, you must check, are these people coming to our places? Are we being given materials to inform our people about the elections? And pay special attention to the special interest groups, women, youth, PWDs, minorities. All the time, they are always missing out on this process. Let's move to the next slide. So the preparation of the election training of election officials, again, I will say this to you. IBC will employ, and Chebukati has said this recently, 300,000 of your daughters and sons and villagers and teachers. They are coming from your village. Can you follow up on how they are being prepared? Because if they fail the elections, then we'll have a problem in the country. The distribution of strategic materials, that is around the time we're going to be going to the polling stations. Do we have everything? Then there will be the election day activities, where we have the voting operations, the counting and transmission of results, which is key, election-related violence, which again can happen on E-Day. And then the others are the results tabulation and verification, disputes, zile zitakuja after the elections, and then the evaluation part of the elections. In terms of the key actors, for the election, I'm trying to rush up because I think I have a few minutes left. Move to the next slide, please. So these are the key actors. Basically, I've indicated their roles. We have indicated their roles in the guide, what they're supposed to do. IEBC, of course, is the centerpiece, the IORPP. The police are key. That's why I was very happy that Matiang'i was here yesterday. And the IG. See, the IG was here, isn't it? Yes, the IG was here. those are critical players in these elections. Security and violence and those kind of things have been the biggest threats to our elections. So when they assure the nation that we are doing very well, or they are going to secure the elections, then we should hold them to account to ensure that that exactly happens. We have all the other political party, of course, the observers and the media, both international and domestic, and yourselves, because you're part of the observers team. When I said observers, is that you also, you're part of the observation team. And one of the things that I said, I will say in the last slide, is that you also need to seek accreditation, all of you, so that you can be able to walk into every polling station and be able to find out what is going on. Move to the next slides so that I can be able to come towards the end. Critical incidences to look out for. Now, these are just some of the things that I'm saying, look out for these things. So violence, intimidation, incitement, abductions, and violence includes murder. We've seen an aspirant in Kisii being killed. And we've seen another one in Mombasa being shot at. All that is violence. We need to look out for this against the aspirants and also for supporters and special interest groups again. Hate speech coming from politicians, fake news and misinformation is the other critical incident to look out for. We have displacement of populations. It happens, of course, when we have problems across the country. Disruption of the electoral processes. In last year's by-elections, nearly all of them, there was disruption. So, whether watakuja kupiga mabuti zile masanduku, ama wamekuja karafa, IBC official, there'll be disruption. And those disruptions are things that we need to look out for as incidences. Misuse of public resources. At the moment, we don't know when a governor is campaigning, kama anatumia pesa ya serikali, ama si ya serikali. When ministers are campaigning, atujua anatumia pesa zao, ama ni pesa za serikali. And the rules are very clear. If we catch somebody using public resources, they should not be able to participate in the election. Or hatua inafaa kuchukuliwa, because that is public money. And the taxes that we all pay are taxes for everybody. We don't, when I give out my money, the taxation, I don't say ilipe watu wa Jubilee, ama ilipe watu wa Azimio, ama wa Kenya Kwanza. Inakuwa ni ya kushughulikia kila mtu. That's why our public resources should not be used for one side or the other, because that is wrong. Vote buying and voter bribery, this is the biggest problem in the villages, and you know that. Watu pesa inapatianwa, watu wanakuja na watu wanapeleka kwa maduka, wanapatiana kama ya nyama, unaambiwa ndo kachukue sukari yako pale kwa ile duka, unaenda unachukua sukari na unapatiwa change na hujapatiana pesa. Mnajua hizi vitu vile zinafanyikaga. Lastly is what action therefore are we recommending in terms of the clergy? One of the things I was saying is seek accreditation to observe the process. And kuna tools. We have in this guide again, there's a tool that we have put at the back of the page and a pledge that is supposed to guide you in terms of the things that you need to look out for. Number two, make interventions at the local level, especially where election-related conflict and violence is concerned. You are the leaders, and I've told you these are your people. Where you can make interventions, especially at the local level where you are at. Educate voters on the process, that is voter education. It's key for effective participation in the elections. It's again your calling, and it is one of the areas that the church has done very well over the years. So it needs to be made more robust and more energized. Condemn electoral bad manners. Hii nchi, one of the biggest problem we have here is not even about kuvunja sheria, sijui kufanya nini, ni tabia mbaya tu. And the church advocates against tabia mbaya. These guys are just bad-mannered politicians, bad-mannered leaders. That's what they do every day. All the things they are doing, where they are taking oath, where they are bribing people, where they are hiring goons, ni mtu mwenye tabia tu mbaya. Simply put. Hakuna kitu ingine, must fight against it, because it's a simple moral issue. And then, lastly, remain vigilant and visible throughout the electoral process. Don't disappear. Keep your visibility, high throughout the election process. Let the politicians know that we are vanguards of our electoral process, and that there's a leadership from the church that is willing to be visible and be vigilant over whatever is happening. That by itself, and as somebody, as Reverend Jeff Tagadaka, for those who know Reverend Jeff Tagadaka, actually let me end with his quote. He used to tell me, he was among my mentors, and he used to tell me, Mulle, there are only 4 Ds in an election. 4 Ds. Deter, and the role of the people who are watching elections, especially observers and agents, to deter any fraud, to delay any fraud, to detect any fraud, and to document any fraud. That is the same thing for the clergy. Deter, by just being vigilant and being visible, you deter, you delay, and you detect what is going on. And then you can document the process so that we can all be able to deal with the issues which are affecting our electoral processes throughout. That's the end of my presentation. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think we are getting more information each time, isn't it? And we will leave this place when we are fully equipped. We want to thank you in a very special way, because that, I think, was a very great eye-opener. Because of time, allow me to accept only one comment or question on behalf of all of us. Boniface.
Thank you. He has not given me the opportunity because he's my bishop, but because I was quick to raise my hand. What is your name again, sir? Mulle. Thank you very much. It's not a question, it's just a comment. Very well put. I was part of election observation at the end of the multi-party era. We were trained and deployed by the NCCK. Tulichapwa, vilivyo. There are some places where you could not be allowed to go in your election observation. We are lucky that in this country now, things have changed a great deal. And we are talking about these processes without looking over your shoulder. And I'm happy about that. As my Bishop Emmanuel had said at some point, that all the laws that will govern our behavior during, before, during, and after elections should be written in the heart. Whatever we want to do as the church may collapse because, as we were told by Sheila, that even them, they have a lot of information to offer the courts. It's not a legal issue. They are matters of the heart. There was a time in life when the values and the virtues were written in the heart. So that if you look at someone who is misbehaving, just a leering look, that's enough to stop them. But now, we are part and parcel. Even the corrupt individuals, as Sheila calls them, okay, are part of us. They are our relatives. They share this money with us, okay? And so, how do we look at them in order to stop them from doing whatever they do? They are part of us. We are saying that we are going to do certain things as the church. We are not going to do it. We are captured by the legal frameworks that are there, by our own practices and relationships, let us go back to that law of the heart, and we will succeed. Thank you.
Before you go, do two things. On our behalf, can you appreciate Mr. Mulle? And then you pray for tea. After we have taken tea, very quickly we come back so that we observe time. By 11:30 we should be here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we have this. At first we were taking photos of your slides, but they are all in here. Thank you very much. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, you have enabled us to gather here, to seek information, and to be energized, and to be enabled to be part of the process of this electioneering period, as your church that you have called to serve you in your holy ground. Dear Lord, we thank you for our brother and for the work that he's doing on behalf of us and in the region. May we be part of this, but above all, dear Lord, as you guide his steps and enable him to work on behalf of us, enable us also to write all these things in our hearts and to be able to be functional in the places that we occupy. Dear Lord, we also pray that as we go out for the refreshment of tea, you may bless it. For that we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Let us just be on our toes and make sure we are back in time. Thank you.